Hello, everybody, and welcome again to Conversations with the Dean. I'm honored today to welcome to the campus our new executive in residence, Randy Goodman.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, Randy, we're honored to not only have you on the campus today, but also to announce your role as an executive in residence for the whole university community, but particularly for the College of Business.
And I'm sure that enrollment will decline immediately.
I doubt very seriously. I imagine it'll increase rapidly. We'll talk in a minute about what an executive in residence does, but let me just introduce you to the audience just a little bit more. You're the former CEO of Lyric Street Records, which was a division of Disney. You're now the chairman of Mayor Dean's Music Council.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that in just a moment. So you've had a star-studded career in the music industry. Let me start with your view of the future of the music business. We've heard a lot about that and about how tough the business is these days. Where's the business headed?
Well, I think that's the, the million-dollar question probably, and I think that's the question that everyone's trying to figure out right now. I think historically there's always been the idea that there is the new model or the next model, or within the music industry it's been the next configuration. But I think things are changing so rapidly. Questions about intellectual property and the law that embodies that. I think so many of those things are open-ended that I think where it goes next is really anyone's guess. Instead of there being, however, one new model, my sense is there's going to be a lot of new and different models. Some will come and work and they'll fall apart, just like I think what's happening in the technology world right now. But if you look back, particularly in the music business and the record companies, which have historically been foundational to the music business, it was always driven by that physical piece of product that you sold the music on, and that for years and years was the vinyl piece of property, and then there became the 8-track, and shortly thereafter the cassette, and then the CD, and really what happened was models were built on that particular or that singular format for so many years, and it was really the aggregated album, and then it became the album version on tape, and then the CD. And I think that once the digitization of it occurred, and everything became a master copy, and then when Napster came online in 1999 and other such technology, it began taking it away from that aggregated approach to it's more about singles now or individual digital downloads. And so what the industry is really dealing with, at least from a record perspective, is the business model was built on selling this aggregated piece of product, which when I started Lyric Street after leaving RCA, wholesale price was $12 or so, and now maybe it's $9, and you're lucky if you get to sell the whole album. You're selling these individual tracks, and these individual tracks really, as of yet, have been significant enough to make up for the lost number of albums and the revenues there. So I think the model's going to change how record companies look. I think superstar artists, you've been reading a lot in the paper about Tim McGraw and Curb. What does an artist like Tim McGraw do next? Does he need a record company? And I think that he's going to need some promotion at radio, because that's really the distribution channel. But there's a lot of those things that are up in the air, which historically they never were up in the air. The model, the systems, the process was what it was. And now all of those are being challenged. So I don't think anyone really knows the answers yet.
We've heard a lot in recent weeks following Steve Jobs' death about what a genius he was. And certainly if there was any business that he really affected, it was the music business. So I'm just curious, in your mind, would you consider Steve Jobs to be a hero or a goat? Would you consider him to have helped the music business or hurt the music business?
Well, again, it's the two sides of the coin of a Steve Jobs. I think that what he did is he finally just said, look, these guys are never going to get their act together, and I think that the individual media companies and the individual record companies, each one of them had a different view of how to move forward. And I think Jobs, because it was Apple and he always put out these elegant pieces of product and there was a cool factor to it. In a lot of cases, he went straight to artists that he had made friends with, and because his hardware was really kind of the creative hardware that was being used. But I think he just said, I'm going to plant a flag in the ground, a stake in the ground, and it's going to be 99 cents, and we're going to have this hardware, and we're going to support it with this software. And I think that's the genius with him, was he just said, I'm just going to take this thing, I'm going to plant a stake, and I'm going to drive everybody into this. And the first hue and cry was, well, we can't make any money off of selling these singles at 99 cents. And after several years, the pricing of the singles became a little bit more elastic, and prices were raised on that. But I think that in a lot of ways, what he did is provided kind of a consolidation point or a rallying point where, okay, this is what it's going to be. For better or for worse, this is what it's going to be, and we're going to go down this path. And for him, it was a matter of saying, if I can control iTunes, if I can control the store, if I can be the distribution channel, then it's going to drive people back into my hardware. So it was genius from that perspective, because he had both the software and the hardware approach. But I think a lot of it was he went out there wisely and used his charisma, I guess, to really go out there and sell this idea in, where a lot of other technologies were saying, we don't care, we're going to go stake our own claim, we're going to do our own thing. I think Jobs went in and said, look, let's figure out a way where we can work in a compromised kind of fashion. How do we create consensus for momentum? And so in hindsight, I think what he did was brilliant to that degree. I mean, there's a lot of people that would have a whole different idea about that, though.
Now, let's go back to the model, the business model in the music industry for just a minute. Some people say, well, the model now is built around touring, around concerts, around the sale of merchandise, as opposed to the sale of the song itself.
Right.
Do you agree with that? And where do you see that headed from this point forward?
Well, I would say that when you look at, let's talk about just revenue streams and break it down that way. When you look at an artist's revenue streams, there's no doubt that with the decline of record sales, and to put that into perspective, in 1999, the recorded business, record companies hit its peak with $14.5 billion of record sales in 1999. At the close of business 2010, almost a year ago, the pre-recorded business was down to $4 billion. So you're talking about $10 billion from 1999 to 2010. And so each individual part of that revenue stream that went back to the artist, obviously, fell off considerably. And so for those artists who could go out there and sell out Bridgestone or arenas and do major tours, and even for artists that are at mid-level, yes, the touring then became where the major revenue came from. For example, a U2 will come into North America and will take out of the United States and Canada $350 million on a tour. That may be that one tour, that may be the aggregated amount of money that they've made from all their record sales. And so part of it was, as record sales were beginning to fall off because of piracy, because of the accessibility of it in different routes, you couldn't steal, you can't really pirate that live experience, that social experience of going to a concert, whosever it may be. And so that social experience began to really be the focus. And almost like with Major League Sports, you look back with players 20 years ago and what they made and what players make now, it's a similar kind of thing. That arc had occurred to the point where the revenue streams were greater, the ticket sales were greater, whereas tickets in maybe the early 80s were $19.95. Now you're selling tickets for $99. And so the gross was so much bigger. But yeah, by and large, the primary revenue stream now for most established artists is through their touring and merchandise. Now the problem with that is, what about brand new artists? Because what's driving those tours is you're going to see let's say a Taylor Swift or a Kenny Chesney, because you want that experience, but also you're going to hear the hits. You're going to see U2, not because of maybe a current record at radio, but you want to hear what their hits, their collection of hits. So without the record company having driven that, getting their songs on radio, creating those or turning those songs into hits, there really wouldn't be an audience there. There really wouldn't be that revenue stream. So the real question is going to be, okay, if that is the driving revenue stream right now, how do these brand new artists that are coming along that are just trying to get heard at radio, how do they find their way? Because I think that's going to be the really interesting thing that happens next, is what happens to the artist development process as record companies contract and are no longer the venture capitalists, if you will, to the degree that they used to be.
So I assume, by virtue of the fact that you left that question unanswered, that it is unanswered at this point.
Unanswered.
Nobody really knows what direction that will take.
Yeah, and I think what will happen is, again, we went back to the Tim McGraw thing. And what I meant by that was, in the early days, Tim McGraw needed Curb Records primarily because of its promotion staff to get those records on radio, to get that critical mass, and for that to drive awareness and to drive record sales, and then obviously to drive touring. Now that Tim McGraw's a superstar, you or I, sitting here with some interns, could probably send his record out digitally or mail it, and any radio station in America is going to at least listen to it and deal with it because it's Tim McGraw. So the real question is, for him, it's really not about selling records as much as it is he wants to remain current on radio, because that allows him to sell tickets to shows. It allows him to sell, or really it's about brand extension. It allows Tim McGraw to extend his brand to colognes, to lifestyle brands, to clothing, whatever else there may be out there. But yeah, that question about how do you grow the next superstars, I think that's going to be, that's the open question. And it's just, I think it's going to be tougher and tougher to do.
We're in, obviously we're recording this in Nashville, Tennessee. Some people call this the Third Coast. And unless you live in Nashville, you really don't realize just how much talent is here. Not just the big names, but the aspiring stars. And these are not all people that need a dose of reality. There are some incredibly talented people who wait tables at restaurants every night.
Right.
So how does a young star today break into the business? How do you get known, and how do you get that boost to become a star?
Well, and it's really no different than it's probably ever been. You go to New York and all the waiters are looking to get on Broadway or whatever, and you go to LA and everybody wants to be an actor or an actress. And in Nashville, you have those kinds of things. It's one of those situations where you know that the marketplace is moving. You're not really sure where it's moving to. You know that you need to move into certain new paradigms, if you will. But at the same time, when you go to your office every day, you're still dealing with what is today. And you go, we've got to get to here, but today I'm still dealing here. And so the record company, because it provides the venture resources to bring the artist on, to get them out of waiting tables, if you will, so that they can focus their time full time on developing in their craft, putting them out in front of radio, putting them out in front of the public. So the model of still going through the record company is still the viable model for today, particularly for the new artists. And that's really where it needs to go, because again, that's where the manpower and dollar resources are to support them and drive them into the marketplace. Because there isn't the same upside in terms of selling records, though, what that's going to mean, like it would mean in any business, is that your decision to put your venture capital behind that little individual company, like it was for me when I first heard Rascal Flatts. I was really a venture guy saying, I'm here to invest money in this startup company called Rascal Flatts. It's a similar kind of analogy. So I think what's going to happen is the venture people, the record companies, and also the very high-powered managers that could come in and say, I can open up 12 doors down the line for you that's going to take you so much time if you don't have someone like me. A big-time manager is not going to want to touch that new artist because it may be 5 years before they get in any kind of peace or in any kind of payback. As my good friend Clarence Spalding, who's a very well-respected manager, likes to say to me, he says, Goodman, 15% of nothing is nothing. And so when I would be talking to him about, come on, I need you involved in this new artist with me, I understood he's looking at maybe 3, 4, 5 years down the road before, if everything happened right, before he might be in a position to get that act into a touring situation, into a revenue situation where all of his time and energy and expertise would be paid off. So because of all of that, because of the reticence about investment, because of the downstream revenue isn't there as much anymore, I just think it's going to make it harder and harder for those acts. I don't think the model's any different about how you get started, because you still need that investment, and you still need to get that airplay at radio. It's really no different than it's been. I just think it's going to be harder to get through the door.
You've been involved in the careers of, oh my goodness, so many famous people. You referred a minute ago to Rascal Flatts. I could just read a list here. Miley Cyrus, Josh Gratian, She Daisy, Aaron Tippin. At other points in your career, you've worked with Waylon Jennings, Dolly Parton, the Judds, Alabama, Clint Black, the Dave Matthews Band, on and on. The list, as they say, is endless. And you did all this through Lyric Street Records.
And RCA before.
And RCA before that. And so you've had this incredible perspective of the music industry, I guess, for what, 20 to 25 years now?
Well, I started working at RCA in 1981. And I worked before that, as you and I were talking about a little bit earlier, for a booking management company called Top Billing, which was run by a very interesting, a great guy, Tandy Rice. So yeah, since 1981, that was the first time I worked at a record label. And then I spent 5 of those years, from 90 to 95, with RCA, working in New York, where I did everything but country music, which that was a whole unique and different and very interesting perspective.
Now, if memory serves me correctly, Randy, Chet Atkins ran the local office of RCA. Did
Yes.
you work with Chet on the business side of the business?
Well, when I started with RCA in 1981, Chet was still in the building. He was really, at that point in time, he had turned the day-to-day of pretty much everything over to Jerry Bradley. And Jerry Bradley, back then they called him division vice presidents. And so Chet was, whatever his title was, maybe senior vice president of A&R. And he was still doing some recording, not much production. He had been obviously the person who had brought in Dolly and brought in Waylon, and had been involved with Steve Wariner and some of those artists. But Jerry Bradley was the head of the label. He was the division head. And then Joe Galante, who ended up taking all of that over, he was the head of marketing at that point in time. And Joe hired me in '81 to be a publicist. And so that's how I got started, and Joe was my boss. So, but yeah, I remember one of the very first meetings, Joe's assistant one day called me and said, Joe wants you in on a meeting, and it's going to be in Chet's office, which was up on the 3rd floor of that RCA building. And I don't know, 24, 25 years old. I'm a kid, 26, I don't know. And you know, I knew that Chet Atkins was in the building, and I knew who Chet Atkins was. And I'd grown up being a player and a musician, and I hadn't met Chet yet. And so I'm told I'm going to be in this meeting in the 3rd floor conference room, which is next to Chet's office. So I go up there, and I want to be early because, you know, I want to do good. And so in the meeting comes Jerry Bradley, Joe Galante, Chet comes in, and I didn't even know who was all going to be in the meeting. And then it's Waylon comes into the meeting with his manager, and I'm this kid, and I'm about to wet my pants because I'm going, oh my goodness, you know, all these legendary people are sitting in there. So I just kind of sat there, and I think for the longest time, Chet and Jerry probably thought that I was mute, because I think I was maybe terrified to say anything. Because what am I going to say, you know? But it was, but what ended up out of that whole thing, Waylon, interestingly enough, because he had such a you know, dark persona, but of all the acts that I worked with, I mean, he would be among some of the artists that I have such great and dear memories. He was just a really, really great guy and could have treated me as I was. I mean, I was basically nothing, just starting out. But I remember taking a trip with him to New York for some publicity that we were doing. And he was always just very gracious to me when he really didn't have to be. And it was always interesting because he always had this persona, this exterior persona. But when I was with him, he just was one of the best artists that I ever worked with.
Well, as I look at this list of incredible artists that you've known so well, worked with, and in many cases they owe their careers to you, you know, I wonder if you had one ticket to buy to one concert before you die, whose concert would it be? Who's the one artist that stands out more than any of the others?
You in terms of people that I've worked
that you've
with?
Worked with, yeah.
Oh my gosh. That would be a very, very, very tough thing. You know, it would probably be, and this is going to sound strange, but it would probably be, oddly, the Dave Matthews Band. And the only reason I say that, not to you know, because whoever sees this, I'm gonna.
Why didn't you name me?
Yeah, you've got me in trouble now. So I might as well go. The good news is I've kind of picked someone who's not here in Nashville, so I'm not as likely to run into some of the other. But I say that because when I was in New York, Joe, my boss, was promoted and made the president of New York, president of RCA, and so he was the worldwide president of RCA. And I thought at that time, this is great, Joe's leaving, I'm gonna get to run Nashville. But Joe had different plans and said, I need you to come to New York with me. And so, extremely intense. It was graduate, postgraduate, I mean, any degree that I might have gotten in the music industry, I think I got it in those 5 years. But towards the end of that time there, we had signed the Dave Matthews Band, and so I was involved with my staff. I was the head of marketing, and so we basically put together the launch plan on that, and I got to see the launch of Dave Matthews. And then Joe had made the decision that he wanted to come back to Nashville, wanted me to come back. My wife and I had just had our first child, and it made sense from a lifestyle perspective, and here was a great opportunity to come back with Joe and be the general manager. But I guess it would be Dave because I never got to participate in the Shea Stadium concerts that he did. I was at the very beginning of that, and so what we had done with Dave was basically get him into the marketplace and get that started, and we had some great success out of the box. But you know, some of the kind of stadium shows that he's done, I mean, these huge soccer stadiums in South America and South Africa and Europe, it would be fun just to go and see that and go, wow, this is what it turned into. Maybe that would be it. So,
how did you become partners with Disney?
I had been, I'd been at RCA for 16 years, New York, came back, and an attorney friend who very involved in a lot of different aspects in the music business, named Joel Katz. He had called me right as I got back from New York and said, hey, I just want to give you a heads up, DreamWorks and Disney both are talking about making moves into Nashville. And he says, I think this is an opportunity for you, this is the right time. And and at that point in time, Joe and I just come back. I was so much, it was weird, maybe it was a codependency thing, but I felt so caught up in, I just felt so connected to Joe, and I wasn't even really thinking about that at that point in time. And we were coming back to RCA Nashville. When we left, it had been the label of the year for a decade, and it had kind of waned a bit, really without the guidance of Joe, I think. And so we came back, and there was just a lot of work to do. And I just told Joel, I just said, I don't think this is the right time to do that. But when I'd gone to New York, what I think I realized when I was in New York was in Nashville, Joe Galani's a brilliant guy. He's the dean of record labels in Nashville. And because he's so brilliant, in a place like Nashville, he could get his arms around everything. But when we went to New York, it was so big, and it was every format that you could imagine, and it was global. He couldn't get his arms around that. And so for the first time in my career, I was finding myself kind of spreading my own wings, creating my own territory, being engaged in making those very big strategic decisions. And so when we came back to Nashville, kind of shortly I realized that even though I had been made the general manager, that, you know, once again, Joe easily could get his arms around that. And so after about, I don't know, a year back, it became obvious to me that maybe this was the right time for me if I was ever going to go and try it on my own, that I should do it. And so I made the decision to leave in '97, and I guess I left RCA in March of '97 and started Lyric Street out of my house was June the 1st of '97 that I went on the payroll. And I'll never forget, I got up that morning and I was like, I'm a Disney employee now. And then I sat down in the den of my house and I was thinking, what have I done? What was I thinking? I mean, I left one of the biggest labels in Nashville, clearly the market share leader, and I'm sitting in the den of my house by myself. So,
but you've got this incredible partner.
Yeah.
In the form of Disney.
Yeah, but they were 2,000 miles and 2 time zones away. And I really didn't, I knew a handful of those people that had hired me. And so, but the good news was, I mean, if I did anything right, I did it right in the early part, and that was just hiring some really good people, because they're the ones that, it was the team that really made all of that work. And I had learned that at RCA, and I knew beginning at Lyric Street, if I didn't make the right decisions about the people first, that nothing was going to work.
What was your first big success at Lyric Street?
Well, I would say that, you know, starting a brand new label and knowing that I was going to compete with an RCA and an MCA and a Columbia and all these big guys, I knew in some degrees we were an independent label or a small label, but we had a huge parent which had deep pockets. And so one of the things that I wanted to do first was to try to at least frame who Lyric Street was in terms of it was being connected with Disney. And the CMA board was having a big meeting out in Los Angeles. And so Michael Eisner allowed us to bring over the CMA board to the lot one evening after it shut down, and basically we had this kind of reception, and Eisner spoke and then let everybody go, and they went on different tours. And I think that was really important to frame for them that Lyric Street may be this small company starting in Nashville, but Lyric Street is really a presence for Disney in Nashville. And I think very early on that was a unique opportunity to put us in the minds of people within that context. But you know, that's one thing. The thing you got to do then is come out of the box and have some success at radio. And I knew that would be harder to do with a new artist. And so there was an artist named Laurie White, who we had some success with at RCA, but you know, had come to a philosophical difference musically. And so I approached her about, let's make a record together, because I really felt like if we made the right kind of record, we could get top 10, top 5, maybe number 1 out of the box. And I knew that we had to do something substantial out of the box so that radio and the rest of the industry said, okay, these guys can play with us. And so Laura White came out of the box. Our first single was a top 5. And then right after that, Aaron Tippin, who I'd worked with at RCA, his manager called me and said, we're going to ask off of RCA. We think we've run our course. Would you be interested in talking to us? And so that fit in with that strategy really nicely. And I said, as long as we all agree that we've got to make some things that are going to be commercially viable at radio. And so the first record we did, we had the first single from Aaron then was a top 5, and then the second single from Aaron was a number 1. So we came right out of the box with 2 top 5s and then a number 1, and his first album came out and it was gold. And so we had that first step into the marketplace where we immediately had success. And I knew that if we didn't come out of the box the right way, then radio was just going to look at us as any other independent, regardless of the show that we put on. And then that allowed us to take Shadazy, which was our very first new artist, and kind of incubate them a bit and really make sure that they were set up right. And our first single with them, we went to number 2 with their first single, and then we had 4 top 5 singles and ended up selling 2 million albums on them. And so that really gave us some momentum. And then right after that, we came with Rascal Flatts, which had, a decade of hits.
How did you meet the guys at Rascal Flatts?
Well, interestingly enough, Dan Huff, who was the producer, who ended up being the producer of Shadazy, because Shadazy was a little bit more contemporary, and our belief was that, looking at sales at that point in time in Nashville, the things that were very traditional were not the things that were selling. They might be easier to get at radio, but at the end of the day, a record company, you only get paid if you sell records. You don't get paid on your chart share, but on your market share. So we made a really conscious decision to say, let's not get so caught up. Aaron was really kind of our representative in the traditional world, and so we wanted to be more contemporary, and also things that appealed to a younger female, a la a Taylor Swift or a Carrie, or early on for us, Shadazy, or a Dixie Chicks or a Shania at that time. We just knew those things had the potential to sell more albums. Tougher at radio, but the payoff could be bigger. So anyway, Dan Huff producing Shadazy. We took a very contemporary kind of act, had a lot of success with them. And so Dan was in business with a producer named Mark Bright, and he had a partner named Marty Williams. And so Mark and Marty were producing or developing Rascal Flatts. And so Mark said to Dan, hey, we'd really like for Lyric Street to look at this act that we've got when the time is right. And so again, a part of it was, so much of it is about having relationships with different people, but at the same time, because we'd had success with something that was a little bit out of the box with Shadazy, and Rascal Flatts was kind of three guys that were going to be a little bit out of the box. Our success with Shadazy made them look at us and say, that's a label that gets what we're doing. And so because of our success, that opened the door. And because of the relationship that I had with Dan, and then that Dan had with Mark Bright, kind of opened that door. And they came in and played for us. And it was, that wasn't a genius move. You just had to sit there and hear them sing. It's like, okay, let's do this. So, a lot of times, people look at it and they say, that's amazing that you saw that. And it's like, well, no, that's not that amazing. It was pretty obvious,
You just got to be in the right place.
You had to be in the right place at the right time. I was lucky.
Better be lucky than good.
Indeed.
Yeah. So now you find yourself as a senior statesman in the industry.
Is that what I am?
Well, maybe you're relatively young to be a senior statesman.
An AARP representative of the music industry.
Well, maybe not that, but you do find yourself in a position to contribute
senior statesman.
You're in a position to contribute to the future of the music business in Nashville. So tell us about the Music Council. Now, this is a partnership that was launched a couple of years ago, 2009, with the Mayor's Office, the Chamber of Commerce, the Nashville Convention and Visitors Bureau, all coming together to do what?
Well, really was, and let me step back from that. It's really, I think the idea is, at least now, and it took it some time to incubate and to figure out really what it needed to be about. But I think the real focus, where we've come with it, is how do we look at economic development for the city of Nashville, particularly as it pertains to the music industry. And so when I came on, a part of it was trying to articulate that vision a little bit more. But as you mentioned earlier in the interview, Nashville is the third coast. There's New York, there's LA, there's Nashville. But what's happening more and more, as people come to Nashville and they realize, and now with technology being what it is, people realize that, you can live in Nashville and you can operate just as effectively as you can in Nashville as you can in New York or LA, and you can do it a lot more cheaply. You can buy a lot more house. You can send your kids to better schools. You can have just a better lifestyle. And so our good kept secret has become not so much a secret, and a lot of people have moved here. And so what we want to do is look at, as the industry begins to change, it's a partnership with the mayor and with the Chamber and the Visitors Bureau in terms of what we call permanent solutions, which sit more with Ralph and the Chamber, where we look at that and we say, what are some business communities out there that might have, they may not want to move their frontline office out of LA or New York because they've been there for so many years and they feel like that's where they need to be. but there may be all sorts of back office functions that could easily work out of Nashville as they could any place. And in so doing, that company's going to save overhead costs, plus it's going to give their employees a better lifestyle and more take-home pay. And it's very much a model that Francis Preston, one of the leaders of Nashville here in the Nashville community, who went on to become the worldwide CEO of BMI, a performance rights organization, when she was in New York, she realized that, you know what, I've got this great place called Nashville that I'm from. All these people are sitting here inputting information, basically doing statistical work. They could be living in Nashville. We could cut our overhead. They could have a better life. And so it's really taking a page out of Francis's model in the early 90s and saying, what are some of those companies out there that we could go to and maybe through enhancements or just the fact that it's Nashville, say, let's think about you guys moving here. And so that's one part of it, and that's what we call the permanent solution. And then the other part of it is what I call the visitors solution, which sits more with Butch and the Visitors Center, and that is Billboard Magazine has a big touring convention that happens in New York every year, but I would submit that more of the biggest tours in the world right now are coming out of Nashville. That convention should be in Nashville. The Grammys should be in Nashville, at least maybe once every 5 years. We put on 8 hours of network television here every year through the CMA with the awards show and the music fest and the Christmas show. So there's no doubt that we can put on world-class network television programming. We do it. But I think one of the question marks about Nashville was, particularly with the Grammys, because that's a week-long worth of events that culminate in the actual Grammys show. So I think a part of it has been, do we have the infrastructure? And I think now with the convention center, once that's completed downtown, I think that's going to give us this unique campus downtown that will provide the infrastructure, and along with the huge convention opportunity and facilities that you have at Opryland. I think that we'll finally be in a place where we can go to the Grammys, we can go to the NARAS organization and say, Nashville's a great place for this. And so there's these two places of trying to bring business leaders in Nashville, music business leaders and general business leaders together to say, okay, how can we go about targeting businesses and companies and targeting events that we can bring to Nashville so that hopefully that rising tide will raise all ships.
Randy, this has been such a fast program, and we're about out of time. I wish we could talk with an unlimited amount of time, because I know you've got a million stories to tell. I just can't end the program, though, without focusing on your new role here at Lipscomb University as our executive in residence, and to point out to our viewers.
Our senior executive in residence.
That's exactly right. Senior statesman executive in residence. But I have to point out that you're really coming home.
Yes.
Because this is your alma mater.
Indeed, indeed. And it feels good, and it's a humbling thing, and it's a very gracious offer by you and by the university, and it's been exciting over the years to be able to come back and be a part of certain events and to see the phenomenal growth of the school. And I mean, when Steve Flatt was made the president, that made me feel really senior, because I was in the same graduating class with Steve. Which, by the way, I was the president of that graduating class, and Steve was the vice president, which I never let him forget that. But and now with Randy Lowry and what you've done here, it's been exciting to watch, and so I'm looking forward to it. I don't know really what I'm getting myself into, but I know it's going to be good, and I'm looking forward to it very much.
Well, I preceded you as an executive in
residence.
residence.
You did.
Before they asked me to serve as the dean, I was actually an executive in residence, and I asked the same question. I said, what do I do?
What do I do? Well, I'll be asking that question a lot, and I'll be asking for a lot of help, because I'll need it, and hopefully I won't get anybody in trouble.
Well,
so.
we're looking forward to working with you and helping you to build the music industry in Nashville, and thank you for helping us to build Lipscomb University as a part of the community.
It's my pleasure.
We're honored to have you today, and our guest today has been Randy Goodman, who is an executive of great distinction in the music industry in Nashville, and now is the chair of the Mayor's Music Council. and also executive in residence,
Indeed.
senior statesman, executive in residence. Thank you for joining us today. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon for Conversations with the Dean.